Dear Indian friends, I'm Angelina Jimbo, and today, in collaboration with the Italian Culture Center in New Delhi, I will get you in a virtual tour through the Royal Palace, known as Palazzo di Normanni, in Palermo, in Sicily. We will discover his history and his treasures, and obviously we will virtually visit the most important place inside the Royal Palace, that is the famous Palatine Chapel with its wonderful mosaics. So now I will share my screen with you. Okay, the Palatine Chapel, built by Roger II of Altavilla inside the Royal Palace in the 12th century, is one of the treasures of the city of Palermo today. And I could say that the beautiful mosaics and the ceilings of the Arab school that it contains are a unique expression of Arab Norman culture and of the values and ambitions of the period. The Normans arrived in southern Italy from the Scandinavian homeland in the early 11th century, and in short order became a military and political force to be reckoned with. And between 1061 and 1072, they gradually supplanted the Byzantines in the control of the southern Italy, of the southern part of Italy. Then, led by Roger I of Altavilla, seized Sicily from the Arabs who had controlled it since the 9th century. Roger II later unified the Norman territories under a single power, and on the 25th December 1130 was crowned King of Sicily, an island whose population was made up of Latin and Greek Rite Catholics, Muslims, and also Jews, and who between them spoke Arabic, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew languages. The new king and his court had grown up in a cosmopolitan environment, and rather than try to suffocate this plurality, took the more pragmatic approach of basing the culture of the new kingdom on a peaceful cohabitation between all these people, all its people. And though Christianity was the official religion, Muslims and Jews were left free to practice their own faiths. And the court, modeled on the Islamic courts of the Mediterranean area and also on the Fatimid court of Egypt in particular, welcomed scholars and also dignitaries from all faiths. Though this period of agriculture proved relatively short-lived, it nevertheless left its marks on Sicilian architecture, and traces of it can still be seen today in various Palermitan churches. But I could say that none of these churches has anything to compare with the interwoven traditions of Palermo's Palatine Chapel. So now I would like to talk firstly about the Royal Palace, the building of the palace, and then we could virtually visit, we could virtually enter inside the Palatine Chapel. So the location of the Royal Palace was seen as strategic even in ancient times, as is witnessed by the remains of a Phoenician stronghold and by the Arab fortress constructed there to protect the city against attack from the west. Corso Vittorio Emanuele, the road that runs east-west down to the seafront, was called by the name Cassaro, derived from the Arabic word for fortress, for castle. Kasr, the Arabic word is kasr. until the unification of Italy in the 19th century. Roger II constructed his palace inside the walls of the older Arab fortifications to protect his court against possible insurrections. And after Roger's death, his successors, especially William I and William II, continued developing the palace, adding other buildings, for example, the Pisana, GIOARIA, Chirimbi, and Greca towers, of which only the first two survive in their original form. These kings, adding other buildings to house court activities. From the 13th and 14th centuries until Sicily became a dominion of Spain in the 16th century, the palace gradually adopted an almost exclusively military function. Then, however, the viceroy sent to govern the island on behalf of the Spanish crown chose the palace as its official seat, and obviously made a number of major structural changes inside the building. This included the construction of the section comprising the loggia overlooking the Fountain Courtyard between 1569 and 1571, and the original Norman one. The royal palace today, therefore, looks radically different from the way it did in the medieval period. The primitive residence of the Arab emirs was a fortification, as I said before, a castle or a fortification, and the Normans accentuated the stronghold aspect of the palace, enlarging the existing buildings and adjoining the new ones. The Normans constructed the Palatine Chapel, the royal chapel, in the very center of the palace, between the two courtyards. Then 4 towers defend the roughly rectangular fortification: the Torre Greca, Greek tower, to the south, the Torre Pisana, the Pisan tower, to the north, the only one preserved, and the GIOARIA and Chirimbi between the former two. In front of the palace was the royal park with a lot of fountains, exotic trees, and also greenhouses. Magnificently decorated and described in many contemporary sources. We know that many banquets were arranged here inside the palace, and the king will meet the Sicilian baronet and the clergy inside this park. The royal apartments, the service rooms, and also the rooms for the guard were collocated around the 2 inner courtyards. The whole palace represented the highest expression of the Western Fatimid building art, and for both architectural qualities and abundance of decorative elements. And at the southern corner of the palace were the political prisons. The whole palace was in a very poor state when, from 1555 to 1570, the Spanish viceroys began to transform the ruins into an acceptable royal residence. They first demolished 3 of the towers. Then the southern courtyard was rebuilt, as was the northern one, which was called Cortile della Fontana, or Fountain Courtyard. The royal apartments were modernized and the facade towards the city completely modified. For example, in 1735, a monumental staircase was built and a sloping ramp to the fountain courtyard was constructed for the many horse-drawn carriages. In 1921, modern repairs and also restorations were begun, and these works brought many Islamic and Norman structures to the light of day. And on your right of the facade, there is the Torre Pisana, a solid cubic construction of pure geometrical design, as you could see, for example, in this picture. To the left of Torre Pisana is the long main facade of the palace, constructed in 1616 by order of Viceroy Villena in a belated classic Renaissance style. The facade hides the apse of Palatine Chapel, which in Norman times had been visible from outside of the palace. Today, the main entrance to the palace is through the second doorway from the left. And now let's go virtually to the first courtyard, the Viceroy MAQUEDA'S courtyard, as you could see in this picture. This courtyard was built around 1600 during the reign of Viceroy MAQUEDA in a severe monumental style of the early Baroque. And the simplicity of the design is balanced by the warmth of the material, a finely cut golden sandstone, as you can see, for example, in this picture. And the monumental staircase in the wing opposite the entrance was constructed in 1735 under Karl III of Bourbon. In the first floor, loggia, in the southern corner, are the political prisons. The only remains of the Arab palace to the right of the staircase on the same floor is the trilingual inscription that King Roger put up in 1142 when the Palatine Chapel was consecrated. The inscription we know that this inscription is written in the three main languages of the Norman Kingdom, Latin, Greek, and Arab languages. The other place that we could virtually visit is Salone d'Ercole, or Hercules Salon. This room was built in 1560 by Viceroy Medina, but the construction was finished 10 years later. For a long time, the salon was used for the opening ceremonies of the General Parliament. And in 1799, under Viceroy Caramanico, an Italian artist, Giuseppe Velasquez, decorated the hall with neoclassical frescoes. Monochrome frescoes depict the various heroic exploits of Hercules. And the style is very academic, as you could see in this picture, and eclectic, but nevertheless pleasant. In 1947, the new Sicilian Parliament assembled in this salon for the first time. Then we could virtually visit another room that is inside the former royal apartments, found in the top floor of the palace. The first room is called the Viceroy Hall, because of the very interesting collection of Viceroy portraits that is disposed here. Then you could visit, and here you could see the Viceroy Hall, inside the Viceroy Hall. Then you could visit and also other rooms of the royal apartments. For example, you could see other rooms here in this picture. Then you could visit the famous towers of the royal palace, the GIOARIA Tower, fairly well preserved, and on the eastern side, the Sala di Ruggero, the room of Roger II, probably constructed and decorated during his reign. The room is magnificently decorated with ornaments and brilliant color mosaics, which are a rare example of that secular art originating in the Persian world that was adopted in Sicily following the Islamic domination. The lower parts of the walls are covered with marble panels. The shape of the vault is articulated by the ornamental borders with motifs of Islamic and Byzantine inspiration. Further on is the entrance to the Pisana Tower, which has been restored, and the room is 15 meters high of a pure geometrical form. And fragments of the Norman mosaics showing hunting scenes and gender scenes have been discovered on the upper parts of the walls. Another courtyard that you could visit inside the royal palace is the Cortile della Fontana, or the Fountain Courtyard. It was constructed between 1581 and 1584 during the reign of Viceroy Marcantonio Colonna. Restorations have brought back most of the original structures, and the simple but organic and powerful design is dependent on continental late Renaissance architecture. Between the Cortile della Fontana, or Fountain Courtyard, and the Cortile Maqueda Courtyard, you could find and obviously visit the wonderful Palatine Chapel. So now we could talk about the Palatine Chapel. Access to the chapel is from the ground level of the Maqueda Courtyard. The colonnade outside the chapel was once covered with mosaics depicting hunting scenes, traces of which remain on the second arch from the right. The other mosaics, including busts of the saints, date from the 19th century. The outside wall of the chapel is decorated, as you can see in this picture, with mosaics by the Italian artist Casamassima, illustrating the biblical episodes of Absalom's rebellion against his father David. The west side of the loggia outside the chapel is decorated with a mosaic completed in the 1830 and also a bas relief with inscription. As you can see, this is the mosaic, and this mosaic is a work of an Italian artist, Antonino Grimaldi, to a design by Vincenzo Riolo, and shows the king Roger II conferring on Simon the diploma of cantor to the chapel. So now we can virtually enter inside the Palatine Chapel, starting our visit from the central nave. The back wall of the Palatine Chapel's central nave is dominated by the platform on which the royal throne stood. The presence of this platform induces us to assume that the chapel was used in Norman times not only as a place of worship, but also as a hall in which important visitors could be received by the king and the court. As you could see in this picture, two lines of 6 columns topped by arches separate the central nave from the aisles. And the walls above the nave are decorated by 2 levels of mosaics depicting the stories of Genesis. The narrative cycle is based on older works and has in turn inspired other decorations, including those in Monreale Cathedral, for example. The faces of the arches are decorated with full-height figures of saints, who also appear as busts in the medallions that divide the seams of the lower bands and in the vaults. The Genesis cycle dates from the 12th century, and it is the work of a local mosaic craftsman. And these are pictures from this part of the central nave of the Palatine Chapel. I have to say that representation of scenes from the first book of the Bible are common in the central nave naves of Latin Rite churches, but normally they are found as frescoes and not as here in the form of mosaic. Obviously, mosaic is a technique typical of the Byzantine world and was used mainly to embellish domes, vaults, and apse walls, not naves. In this case, God, for example, is depicted with an appearance similar to that of Christ elsewhere in the chapel, and appears among realistic details that bring the narrative to life. Okay, these are other pictures from the central nave, but the scene of the creation of the birds, for example, or the birds and fishes, as you will see here, for example, depicts God along with a number of recognizable species. And for example, here you could see a lot of birds, for example, a peacock. We can identify a flying peacock on the left and a stork on the right. And also, for example, here, the green the green bird here, that may well be a parrot. Also, the creatures of the water are similarly realistic. For example, you could see clearly a squid and an octopus here in this part. And they are clearly identifiable among the transparent and beautiful waves. Another wonderful scene that we could see in this lesson is the Adam and Eve's banishment from the Garden of Eden. Here you could see the most surprising figure of this cycle, especially in particular the fiery cherub with a sword and wings dotted with eyes, guarding the door to Eden. In this scene, you could also see, for example, Adam and Eve pushed forwards by another angel. And also, as you could see, they are shown clothed for the first time by God to hide their bodies after they ate the forbidden fruit and learned the shame of nakedness. And now we can talk about the throne platform. The exact date of the decorations above the throne platform on the west wall of the chapel central nave is unknown. Directly above the wall at the back of the marble platform lies a mosaic band with this intricate motif of leaves inhabited by birds, and also with two lions inside medallions. Above this appears Christ Pantocrator, the all-powerful Christ, enthroned with the saints Peter and Paul, to either side, and with also the archangels Michael and Gabriel looking down from above. The significance in this case of the composition and of its position here, it's perfectly clear. Christ and the founders of the Roman Church support the Norman kings and their heraldic animals, the lions, thus conferring divine power on the earthly kingdom. This interpretation will also confirm that the above dating, since the relationship between the Kingdom of Sicily and the papacy improved after the death of Roger, with the transfer of power to his successors towards the end of the 12th century. And another wonderful part of the Palatine Chapel that you could admire inside the Palatine Chapel is the ceiling. I could say that there is nothing like the painted wooden ceiling over the Palatine Chapel central nave anywhere else in the world. It was completed at the beginning of the 12th century, probably by Egyptian artists, and it consists of a band of muqarnas, that is a structure of multi-side niches, typical of the architecture of Iran and North Africa, as you could see in this picture. So this ceiling consists of a band of muqarnas, with the ceiling as such above it formed by star-shaped panels interspersed with stalactites. The ceiling was painted by Egyptian artists and decorated with scenes of fantasy and also court life, as you could see, for example, here in this picture. But I would like to talk about one image in particular, this image in particular, the game of chess. In fact, this image of two men sitting in front of a tent will be the oldest known representation of the game of chess. Chess became popular in much of Europe during the 12th century and was encouraged by both Christian and Islamic culture as a game of perception and skill, in contrast to games of chance. Chess was a popular game at court, obviously, and also an integral part of the duties of a nadim. And this scene is similar to those showing moments of daily life around the palace or inside the palace. Probably in this picture, the older player on the right is perhaps explaining the rules of the game to his younger companion, as you could see in this picture. Now I would like to talk about the aisles of the Palatine Chapel. The two aisles are far narrower than the nave. Their walls are decorated with mosaics illustrating episodes from the lives of St. Peter and St. Paul. And this is a picture where you can see St. Peter and St. Paul. The introductions of the arches that separate the aisles from the nave are also covered in mosaic decorations, featuring images of the saints. The scenes from the lives of St. Peter and from the lives and St. Paul, to whom the chapel is dedicated, are illustrated in mosaics in both the aisles. And the image cycle is inspired not only by the Acts of the Apostles, but by various apocryphal texts. For example, the scenes of Peter and Paul together in Rome are certainly drawn from such stories. The aisle ceilings are the work of the same artist who painted the ceiling over the nave. But structurally, however, they are far simpler and consists only of long, narrow panels rounded at the end, as you could see in this picture. Many of the original 12th century paintings have been lost from the aisle ceilings as the result of water infiltration during the centuries, water infiltration through the roof. Of the two ceilings, that of the north aisle is better preserved. In fact, around half of its paintings are still original. Inside the Palatine Chapel, you could also admire other interesting scenes inside the transept. For example, here you could see scenes from the story of Christ, or for example, the story of the Nativity, or other episodes from the life of Christ, for example, in this case, the flight of Egypt. And now we could talk about the presbytery. The presbytery is a square space separated from the nave, the transept, and the main apse by arches, as you could see in this big photo. Two of these arches are decorated with the scenes of the Annunciation and the presentation of Jesus in the temple. The presbytery is capped by a dome at the top of a tambour, decorated with images of the evangelists and prophets. The center of the dome features Christ Pantocrator surrounded by angels and archangels. Another image of Christ Pantocrator appears in the semi-dome of the apse, as you could see here, above a 17th century mosaic of the Madonna between Mary Magdalene and John the Baptist. The mosaics of the central apse are among the most restored in the Palatine Chapel here. The large Christ Pantocrator in the apse semi-dome positioned over the original window to emphasize Christ's role as a source of light. Many of the chapel's decorations focus on divine light, and many of the inscriptions mention it specifically. The mosaics of the dome are considered the best in the entire chapel from a technical and artistic point of view. Structurally, the dome itself rests on a cylindrical tambour, and with 4 niches have been opened into the tambour, and all contain the image of an evangelist. The dome itself is decorated with the 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael, arranged in a circle along with 4 unidentified angels to form like a crown around the medallion containing Christ Pantocrator. The figure of Christ, the Pantocrator, the figure of Christ, forms the pivot around which rotates the dome's great wheel of prophets, evangelists, and also angels. Christ's position at the center of the dome, depicting the entire structure of the kingdom of heaven. And this is an entire picture of the presbytery part of the Palatine Chapel. So this was the last slide, the last part of this virtual tour inside the Royal Palace and obviously inside the Palatine Chapel. Thank you very much for your attention, and bye from Italy.